Good evening. Today's been a relatively quiet day in terms of news from the Ukrainian battlefront. There are some updates, ongoing heavy fighting in some of the areas we've discussed in the last few days, particularly around Donetsk region and Zaporozhye, and I'll come to some details on those in a moment. But in areas further south, such as Kherson and Odessa, much quieter today in terms of news. The ongoing missile strikes that have gone for the last 6 nights seem to have calmed down somewhat today, with less reports of the large Russian bombers being launched over Ukraine. Less reports of air raid sirens going off in the oblasts of Ukraine. However, there is a report from the New York Times today indicating that reporters of the New York Times have been speaking to anonymous sources within the Pentagon who have suggested to them that the authorities in Kiev have announced to Washington that a new phase of the offensive is about to start, and the direction of the main attack will be in the Zaporozhye region, heading south through Orekhov down towards Tokmak, and then down to Melitopol in the Sea of Azov. This is what has long been thought would be the plan of attack in the Ukrainian offensive, to push through from Zaporozhye to get down to the Sea of Azov and cut off Crimea from the rest of Russia. This was expected, by all accounts, to have happened within the first 4 or 5 days of the offensive, which began back in June. However, as we saw, the lack of air support for the Ukrainians and the outnumbering, the overwhelming mismatch in terms of artillery, the Russians in some cases being estimated as having 5 times as much artillery available, or even more in some cases. That seemed to put a stop to those plans very quickly, as the Ukrainian forces encountered in the first few days minefields around the areas of Orekhov and the Veremka ledge. So while there has been some success for the Ukrainians in these areas in Zaporozhye, there's heavy fighting going on there at the moment. Most of the reporting that we are getting today is of the fighting around those areas, and I'll come to that in just a moment. And one does wonder if we may see now a big push from Ukraine. Certainly, the supply of military aid has been ongoing from the West, although appearing to occur in smaller amounts of recent, particularly in terms of shells, as we've discussed many times, the 155mm artillery shell. The West is low on supplies of these and struggling to provide them to Ukraine. Some of the reporting today this is Russian reporting, talking about the Ukrainian attacks in the area just south of Bakhmut. They're saying there that the artillery fire from the Ukrainians today is intense and just not stopping. So there's definitely pushes coming from the Ukrainians. One does begin to wonder how long they can sustain this for, given the stories of the shortages they may have. I will move on to now talking a little bit about what has been reported as happening today. Interestingly, there were missile strikes. Of the few reported Russian missile strikes today, those that were reported were in the west of Ukraine, near Lviv, or pronounced Lvov, in the west, in a town of Starokostyantiv. A missile strike on a base which housed Su-24s. Now, the Su-24 fighter craft are ones which have been modified to be able to carry and deliver the Storm Shadow long-range ballistic missiles. They may also be capable of carrying Scalp missiles. I can't confirm that, but the Storm Shadow and Scalp are very similar missile design. There weren't any reports on if craft themselves were damaged or if damage just occurred perhaps to an airfield where they are launched from, but that's missile strikes reported there. So if we start up then up in the north of Ukraine on the northern front in the Kharkiv region, there have been breakthroughs here. So there is a 120 kilometer vertical front established by the Russians, and it seems to be moving westward. This front, if you go from Bakhmut and go directly north about 120 kilometers, you'll end up near Kupiansk, which is just on the Oskol River, and the Russian front line meets the Oskol River just above Kupiansk, and it then extends down to Bakhmut, and along the first 80 or 90 kilometers of that stretch from Kupiansk down, there has been over the last 7 to 10 days reports of Russian advances, and in some cases quite significant advances measured in kilometers rather than in meters or hundreds of meters. There are reports today in this Kharkiv region around Sohivka, breakthroughs towards Novojehorovka and Nadia. When we come down south further from there to near the Kremenaya forest, about 20 kilometers southeast of Liman, is the Serebransky forest. Heavy fighting reported there, as well as counterattacks from the Ukrainians. The Russians reporting, though, that they've been able to hold the advance and the land that the Russians have taken in that area. The Russians certainly looking stronger in the northern front, this area from Bakhmut north, from Bakhmut south down to Donetsk, very intense pressure from the Ukrainians, and then heading west from Donetsk to the Zaporozhye region, again very heavy fighting still ongoing in those areas. In Krasnogorivka, which is about 5 kilometers north of Marinka in the Donetsk-Bakhmut area, there's been fighting going on there. There has been the use of long-range fires, so the Russians have been reaching out with artillery to this area, trying to strike Ukrainian forces just behind the front line. Klishchiivka. Now, Klishchiivka, which is just on the southern flank of Bakhmut, is an area where the Ukrainians have had success in the last few days. There have been ongoing reports of small advances for the Ukrainians in this area, claims of them being within Klishchiivka, controlling half of Klishchiivka, controlling Klishchiivka, and then counterclaims by the Russians that they have been able to push the Ukrainians back out of Klishchiivka in its entirety. Looking at the deep state map today, which is a Ukrainian-leaning map, it seems to indicate a similar Russian line as to yesterday, which would seem to indicate that Russia still controls Klishchiivka at this time. Although the reporting is that the fighting here is intense, the commitment from the Ukrainian forces in this area is very strong. This is one of the areas where they were saying that the artillery duels are very heavy. However, also the Russians are reporting that they are seeing heavy losses in terms of troops in this area south of Bakhmut. The impression they are giving is that Ukraine is just fighting all out tooth and nail with no regard for troop losses in order to make advances in this area. Moving to the west from Klishchiivka to the Veremka ledge area, around the area of Zaporozhye, there is heavy Ukrainian fighting again. This area has seen a push and has been an area of some success for Ukraine during the offensive, where they have moved down through some of the grey zone through Neskuchne and getting down to the Urozhne area. Again, there have been video reports of heavy losses in terms of equipment and men to the Ukrainians in this area. Also, there have been reports recently of loss of Russian soldiers in these areas as well, with video of Russian soldiers being deployed in out of an armoured personnel carrier to a small damaged township, and it seems that they were unaware that there were a number of Ukrainian troops right where they were dropped off with the protection of these sort of semi-destroyed buildings, and the Russian soldiers seem to suffer very heavy losses in that video. Moving further west across Zaporozhye. There are reports, again, of fierce fighting and heavy losses in terms of equipment for the Ukrainians around Robotny and the area of Mala Tokmachka. There are reports that the Ukrainians made advances here today, sending in dozens of armoured pieces of equipment, armoured vehicles, and that large numbers of those were destroyed in the fighting, along with heavy losses of their troops. There's also been video showing that the Ka-52 Alligator Russian attack helicopters are still operating in this area and operating successfully, it would seem, with video showing them using anti-tank missiles to destroy Ukrainian pieces of heavy equipment. Moving further south, it's very, very quiet in terms of news in Kherson. There's really nothing that's been reported out of the Kherson region today. A few days ago, there were reports from the Russians that they believed there was a troop build-up there, and the Ukrainians were planning to mount an attack across the Dnieper River. That thus far hasn't eventuated, but may be coming. This may be a supporting activity as part of part of what the New York Times is announcing as a renewed push by the Ukrainians to get to the Sea of Azov. As I mentioned, it's midsummer now in Ukraine, and so the Novokharkovka reservoir, which was previously full of water, has now had a month or more to dry out. I've seen videos of farmers moving down onto those mud flats areas now and starting to farm them, grow potatoes in there. So it's possible that from the Kherson region, some of these troops may be amassing and then looking to move north, and perhaps if the ground is stable, they may use that relatively lightly undefended area, undefended by the Russians, of the reservoir, which is now dry, and may advance across there. It would be an open advance across completely barren, clear territory of about a 5-kilometre distance, so it wouldn't be easy. And if the ground hasn't dried out enough, then it would become a turkey shoot for the Russians if the Ukrainian equipment were to bog down in the mud there. But if they are able to get through, that may perhaps be where we will see some more activity in Kherson. Apart from that, really, in Kherson, most of the activity has been around the Ukrainians trying to retain hold of a bridgehead they've established over the Antonovsky Bridge onto the eastern side of the Dnieper River. Again, while they have managed to hold this, the Russians have pulled back from that bridgehead because the Ukrainians are able to shell the Russians from the western side of the Dnieper River. The Ukrainians have held this at a very high cost. There was reports I was reading yesterday of 50 boats have been destroyed in that area, and there's been multiple video reports of missile strikes upon the eastern spans of the bridge, heavy bombing in that area. So the Ukrainians are holding positions there, but appear unable to expand their foothold at that stage. There is also just south of Kherson some talk of ongoing fighting in the islands that exist there now. Moving down further, Odessa, there were reports of a small number of, or a missile strike on the Odessa port. Apparently, a Kaliber missile was fired from a submarine in the Black Sea. This was fired at a very low angle, which kept it under air defense, made it difficult to detect, is what the armed forces of Ukraine have reported. And there is a report of one hit on a port administration building. So it seems as though the intensity of the missile strikes against the Odessa ports have slowed overnight, but still haven't stopped completely. In the Snake Island, there's reports of bombing on Snake Island. Now, Snake Island is tiny. It's about 600 meters across. What's that? I don't know. A quarter of a mile, half a mile or something. It's not in the old metric system, old imperial system. It's about 600 meters across, which is not far at all. There's two main clusters of buildings on there with about 5 or 6 buildings each. So this isn't a large island. Reportedly, a Fab 500 or a number of Fab 500 bombs were used to bomb Snake Island. If those hits were on target, I imagine that they would have almost just wiped out whatever there was on Snake Island. There was no reporting given on what had been struck, just that Fab 500 bombs had been used. Snake Island is about 30 kilometers off the Ukrainian coast, and it sits along the main shipping line on the ports to Odessa. Also, just this a little bit on the Black Sea there, the Turk Stream pipeline. This is a pipeline which is about 830 kilometers long. It runs from Suko in Russia, on the Russian mainland, runs from the northeast down to the southwest of the Black Sea to Kirklareli in Turkey. And the starting point of Suko is about 70 kilometers south of the Kerch Strait. Now, whether this is at all related or not, I don't know. But the Russian FSB reportedly discovered a foreign civilian ship that could have been used to previously deliver explosives to Ukraine. The information provided was that a ship with traces of TNT and dinitrotoluene were found on the hold on the surface of a boat, a foreign dry cargo ship, the BMO River, which is en route from Turkish Sinop port to Rostov-on-Don port in Russia. In June and July, this vessel had allegedly called at the Ukrainian port of Reni twice, and a decision was made to ban the vessel travelling through the Kerch Strait. Now, this vessel doesn't appear to be full of explosives now, but it reportedly has traces of it on it, and so that it may have in the past been carrying explosives. So, yeah, it's interesting when you think about the Black Sea. There certainly are targets there that the Ukrainians would be interested in. The Kerch Bridge itself, we've had the second strike on it just recently. The Turk Stream pipeline. Now, there was just earlier this week reports of a Russian patrol boat, which I believe may have been patrolling the Turk Stream pipeline. It was attacked by 2 Ukrainian drone ships. Reportedly, it used its onboard guns to stop both of those drones. Those drone ships were packed with explosives. It was able to destroy both of those before it could reach the boat. And no casualties were reported there. So yeah, the Black Sea does seem to be in the news a lot more of late. It does seem to be heating up in some respects. The Ukrainian intelligence agency reported today in a televised press conference that yes, they had attempted to strike the Kerch Bridge, and that the Kerch Bridge would remain a target for them. So we may see more in this area as the grain deal has now completed, and with the recent strikes on the Reni and Ismail ports. These are on the far west of Odessa on the border with Romania. After those strikes, the strikes on the Nikolaev port and the main Odessa port, all shipping in and out of the Ukrainian ports will cease, you would imagine. It would be a very brave captain to take their ship that way at this stage, given what the Russians have said and given their really quite precise missile strikes on the port of Reni, where they landed their drones and missiles only meters away from the Romanian border. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the Black Sea over the next few weeks. I think we're certainly seeing activity on the southern front of the main front line in Ukraine, with the Ukrainians pushing that way, and then the Russians pushing in the north. We've also got reports of Wagner forces in Belarus, of Polish amassing forces on the Polish-Lithuanian border at the Suwalki Gap. There's the talk of the hidden or the stealth mobilization going on in Russia, and even the deputy Deputy Ukrainian Defense Minister, she was indicating that she believes the Russians are amassing an army of 100,000 up in the Kharkiv and northern region with 900 tanks. So there's definitely 2 or 3 areas now which of different interest, but of areas that we will need to be watching just to see what happens there. One piece of news I saw today was the Ukrainian Vice Prime Minister for Education, Mikhailo Fedorov. He was shown in front of a yard just full of drones, and he's announced that he has 1,700 drones that will be sent to the front line. And I looked at that and I thought that's quite an amount of drones to be sending. But then doing a little bit of research, I found a couple of articles. One I'd found earlier in the week, but one indicating that China has been exporting to Russia over the last 15 months at least 30,000 drones. Now, these will be the smaller FPV ones, but that, if you do just a rough average there, that's 2,000 drones per month the Chinese have been supplying to the Russians, if this reporting is correct. And there was the article from earlier this week where the developer of the Lancet drone was shown reporting on the facts that they have 200,000 Lancet drones on the shelves ready to go, and they have 1 million under development. So when I look at those numbers there, again, I feel like the Russians at this stage have the upper hand in terms of volume of drones. As I announced yesterday, very interestingly too, the Russian Ministry of Sport has recognized competitive drone racing and laser tag as registered sports within Russia. And the logic behind this is that within a year, if they support these sports and develop competitions for them, that within a year's time, they will have millions of trained FPV pilots, people who are competitively good with flying drones, and perhaps getting similar numbers of people who are experienced with laser tag, and now not laser tag, but more importantly, the military tactics of operating in a small squad or military assault group in breaching residential buildings. We see so much of the fighting today occurring in just this domain. Streets, apartment blocks. You see videos of Russians and Ukrainian fighting floor to floor, going up the stairwells in apartment blocks and this sort of thing. So the Russians certainly are making a big investment in drone capability, not only the technology, the material, but also ensuring that they have people who are experienced, able to fly these and able to fly them So immediately, without training, pre-trained, if you will, I imagine one of the things we will start to see in the near future will be developments in terms of anti-electronic warfare capabilities and range extension. As you can imagine, if you can have a soldier flying a drone or flying one drone and then another and then another and another from a safe location, then that's better than having that person being able to fly a drone and be at the front line where they could still be killed or injured. So I would expect that in the next few months we'll start to see technology enabling the extension of the range of these drones, so that you might have your drone pilots sitting back 10, 20, maybe more kilometers from the front line and from where their drones are attacking. This how difficult this may be in war. It could be very difficult. Now, obviously, there are electronic warfare and countermeasures which will try and stop this from occurring. But that's where I imagine we'll start to see some sort of technological advances. One last thing. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has visited North Korea to meet with the leader Kim Jong-un. By all reports, the meeting has been a very friendly one. Shoigu has been given a tour of some of the defensive capabilities of the North Korean military, showing off some of their drones, some of their ballistic missiles. Some of the drones that we're talking about here are of different nature. These are ones which are similar to, like the American MQ-9 Reapers and the Global Hawks. These are the large reconnaissance and attack drones, which the North Koreans have been developing. They then finally they met for a celebration dinner, which was celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Patriotic Liberation War, or the Korean War, which ended in 1953. And this again is one which is an interesting sort of facet of history. The Korean War has never ended. The Korean War has been paused in an armistice since 27th of July. So since today, so for the last 70 years, North and South Korea, North Korea being supported by China and the Soviet Union at the time, South Korea being supported by the United States, North and South Korea are still at war, just under armistice at the moment. So this is, in some respects, possibly a very fragile situation. This truce could be broken, and if it was, we could then find that we have another international conflict on our hands. I'm not suggesting that it will be, but I just think it's interesting to remember that this isn't two nations who concluded their war and then settled disputes after that war, and all of that, sort of made reparations or whatever. In this case, the fighting stopped, but the war hasn't stopped. All right. Thank you very much. If you've watched this far, please, if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you soon.